So, welcome to the show, Stephanie Parrish, a longtime friend and another young woman. As we age, we call ourselves young women instead of old
Yeah.
hags.
No, that's not us.
That's not us. No, I just really appreciate Stephanie being on the show today because she also grew up in the Pocatello area where all of my story took place. And even though we didn't know each other super well, we knew each other well enough, and through associations, we always were crossing paths. And it's
Right.
very interesting to me to hear her perspective about how my story affected her and her family, and how it opened up conversations and revelations that she didn't know anything about, and many of her family members did not know about. So I just want to introduce Stephanie Parrish, who is sitting in her office at her health and wellness clinic, and that's what she works on. And we'll hear a little bit about what you do now, Stephanie. But let's go back in time. Let's go back to the
Let's go
early,
back to our happy, innocent days, right?
yes, or even the 60s. I know you're a little bit younger than I am. So at what point do you remember, those fond childhood memories? When do your memories start of the happy times in our beautiful, safe, what felt like utopian community of Pocatello, Idaho?
It was, and you probably know, I grew up on Parrish Lane. My last name is Parrish. It used to be my grandpa's farm, and all my cousins lived next door. So there was four of my family, my dad and his three brothers, and all their families, and my grandma. We all lived on the same street, and it was a little dead end street in Chubbuck, Idaho, and we really had a magical growing up. We really did. We were all very, very close, very, very trusting. Everybody watched out for everybody, and most people didn't know whose parents were whose. We were one of the Parrish girls. There was 11 little girls before there were any boys. So we were all very, very close. They were all our best friends. When we did anything, we did it together. When we were in plays, when we started taking dance, when we were doing voice lessons, we were doing music lessons, there was always a couple of us, or 3 or 4 or 5 of us at one time doing it.
Right.
So we were all very involved in each other's lives and very involved in taking care of each other. And like I said, we'd go for hours and hours and hours. And we had a fort in our back field with a bunch of rocks, and we all built our own apartments, and we had, cardboard televisions, and we'd spend hours out there. And, when it was dinner time, it's time to go home.
Right.
And most of the time we'd end up at somebody else's house, and it was a phone call or a walk across the street. Is Stephanie there? Is Debbie here? One of us somewhere, and we just didn't worry about stuff. And we had 6plexes and 4plexes and duplexes all up and down our street that my family had built. And every Saturday it was a gathering at the end of Parrish Lane, and everybody on the street came down, and we'd have root beer and from A&W root beer and popcorn. And it was just a magical upbringing.
Yeah, I've often said that it feels to me like the first, 12 years of my life, including the years with the Birchtold family, because we thought they were our best friends. I mean, the children and his wife, we just loved all of them, and we think they loved us too. It was very genuine,
Right.
not knowing that he was going to take a hard left turn.
Yes.
So those first 12 years, it really felt like growing up in Camelot, the way the songs go from the musical,
Yes.
that it only rains on certain days. It's only allowed to, and it's the perfect
Yeah.
temperature, and even though we all know that, of course, there was other ups and downs in childhood, it really was almost, what's the right word? Imperceptible. Like,
Right.
it just, I don't know if everybody looks back on their childhood, if it was a happy childhood, and thinks that, but it really was, what you said, magical.
Yeah. And we had such a nucleus of friends and family in Pocatello. Pocatello was just a beautiful place to grow up in, and I think that's why we got to know each other, because everybody in the community, at least in our world, was involved in plays and music and dance and just all the things we were involved in. It was always room for everybody.
Yes, absolutely. It was a community sense and sensibility. And so, like the community musicals. Now,
Right.
the first time that we really officially met, do you remember that? Do you remember how we
I
met?
remember when you did Oliver. I was not in Oliver, but we went to see it 4 or 5 times. Um, but I remember, we were in the two school musicals together in high school. We were in. There's some other things. I was trying to think of some of the community theater that I had done in my younger years before high
Mhm.
school too, and I think we were involved in some of those together as well.
Yes, because
And
Oliver was a really important moment for me playing Oliver, the boy, because I looked like a little boy with my little short shag kind of pixie haircut. And of course, I was very tiny anyway. I stayed very small and certainly flat chested and all of that for many, many years beyond that. But it was interesting because that was one of those times when Berchtold saw me in the play
right,
with his family and everything, but it became something where he used lyrics from the songs in some of the letters, that the love letters that he would write to me, and they would
yeah, where is
have these
love?
phrases. Yeah, where is love? And as long as he needs me, I
Hmm.
know where I must be, you know. And it was very interesting how much that had an effect either on him or how much he manipulated those, again, innocent, wonderful memories of mine being in plays and being in
Right,
these shows with my community, friends and sisters, and all of us sharing in that. He either manipulated it on purpose or it had a big impact on him as well, because he used that as an opportunity to start sending flowers, wishing us luck, because Susan was also in that show. She was
right,
one of the townspeople, and then because Karen and Susan and I did a lot of singing together and these kind of plays. So I find that it's an interesting thing to go from that Camelot experience into what actually happened in a small town where everybody knew each other, and
yeah.
for me to be, kidnapped. And I just like you to walk us through a little bit about what happened. What was the catalyst that got your family, talking about abuse?
Right. Well, as I said, that just wasn't even a discussion. Nobody talked about it. It wasn't
Mhm.
it wasn't something that was even brought up. You didn't discuss it. If it was happening, nobody knew. And when you first disappeared the first time, I remember our family getting together and they're like, "This has happened to the Broberg family," because my family knew your family very well. "This has happened to the Broberg family. We need to just make sure everybody's safe." Everybody went on high alert. And I remember then sending things out through the church, sending them out through the school, sending them out through our neighborhood, just everybody saying, "Keep an eye out for her. We don't know where she's at. We don't know what's happened." It was just a lot of uncertainty, as it was for your family. And my dad kept saying every night, "We're going to pray for them. We're going to pray for them. We're going to pray for them. And
Mm,
so that was, and then he kept saying, "Nobody knows what's happened to her. So we just need to stay close and stay tight and make sure we're okay." And again, like I said, it wasn't just my family, it was the whole Parrish family. Anything that
right.
happened amongst all of us,
So
right?
how many brothers and sisters were with your father and all of those siblings? You
Well, the
cousins
first
were a
time it was
ton
the
of
six of
cousins.
us. The first
Okay.
time it was the six of us kids and mom and dad. And within a day or two, we had every Monday night, we'd have the Parrish family get together, family home evening. And I remember all of us. So there was probably 35 or 40 of us because there was a lot of us that lived on Parrish Lane,
Right.
4 brothers and all their children and
So it was
grandma.
four brothers. Four
Four
brothers
brothers lived
and all
on the
the
same
children.
street right next door to each other. And we had 6, and my uncle had 5, my other uncle had 7, my other uncle had 4. So there was a lot of kids and a
Yeah.
lot of love and a lot of protection and caring. And then my grandma, of course, was just right up the street.
Okay.
And I remember having a family get together on Monday night right after you had gone missing, and our parents trying to explain to us what had happened, but without knowing what had happened,
Right.
and that we just needed to pray for your family. That stuck with me so strongly. That stuck with me. And it's like, where did Jan go? And
Yeah.
I'm a couple years younger than you and just
Mhm.
wasn't sitting right. It's like, how could that happen? What happened? And we all took piano lessons. We all walked to piano. We all walked to everywhere. It was just,
Right.
so all the things that were happening were things that we were doing. And I was
Right.
like, okay, so it kind of did shift
Yeah, because in the
our world.
newspaper, it would have said something about that I was picked up for my piano lesson. And so that would have
Right,
been a key thing to a 10-year-old. Like you would have been about 10,
right.
I was 12, and you're going, okay, wait, I walked to my piano lesson and I come home after
We walked
piano.
everywhere. We were
Yeah,
we were everywhere, you know. I mean, I sit there and I think the things that we did as children, there's no fetching way I would let my kids do them,
I
you know.
know.
But
So
it's a
true,
different
right?
world.
It
It's a
is.
different world. And then the
Well, and
second
it's
time,
more aware. The world is more aware. It wasn't that there wasn't
so
abuse, but we didn't say
right,
those words. We didn't talk about abuse. We didn't have any framework for child abuse. It was not even a law
right,
until the mid 70s that, abuse, beating your children. It was mostly focused around physical abuse, but it was mentioned that sometimes there could be, I didn't know what the word incest meant, but hearing that as an older teenager and going, ooh, really, and yet that is the most common kind of abuse. And I know you have more to
right.
speak on about all of those things. So as you started to kind of have this conversation within your family and just and your own questions inside of your own mind, what um, what kind of relationship did you have with your parents?
Well, it was interesting that you asked that because this has brought up a lot of memories for me and a lot of emotion and a lot of things. And I just wrote my first book, and it's not on that, it's on something else. But this has brought up a lot of memories for me because when I talk about abuse, when you were going through what you were going through, I had no idea that a number of my family members were going through the same thing. They weren't being kidnapped, but they were being abused.
Yeah.
And we didn't know that. I didn't know that. Nobody knew that. You know, I had a specific family member, an uncle, that would show up every time my parents were gone. And, you know, he loved me, I thought, and he was really big military, and he'd wrap my arm around my back, and he was just really gruff with me, but he never sexually abused me. But I remember very vividly, and it's funny because I was about 10 or 11, so it was right in the same time frame that you were going through what you were going through, and I was trying to make sense of it as a child and trying to talk to my parents about it, but nobody knew anything. Nobody
Right.
knew anything. And I remember my uncle had come over again one night without my parents being there, and he was just being really weird like he does, but he was really strong. He was a really strong, he
Mhm.
had a butch haircut and was just so strong. And I remember he would always tease me. He'd always pinch me on the sides, or he'd pinch
Mm.
my butt, or he'd just do things that I didn't like, I wasn't comfortable with. And he picked me up over his shoulder and he took me back to the bathroom. And I'm kicking and screaming and trying to play with him so he wouldn't get angry with me, you know, because he
Mhm.
was so strong. And my parents weren't there and everybody else was oblivious to what was going on. And he took me into the bathroom and he stuck me in the bathtub
Mm.
and he put his hand on my chest and turned the water on. And he kept saying, "You're going to do what I tell you to do or else." And I'm like, and I'm fighting him and fighting him. And so he takes his other hand and puts him on my legs as the water is filling up. And I'm fully dressed, but he's got his hand on my chest and he's holding my legs down in the bathtub. And the water is just getting higher and higher and higher. I'm like, I'm going to die. He's going to drown me right here in the bathtub.
Oh my gosh.
It was just terrifying because I hadn't had super negative experiences with him. I just really tried to avoid him at the most that I could, you know. But he's
Do
got
you
his
know
hand on
why?
my chest. What's that?
Is there any reason why you avoided him? Is it
Yes,
just a gut
and I'll
feeling
I'll
or
tell you
okay,
that in a minute. No,
okay.
and I'll tell you that in a minute. It's things that I put together later.
Mhm.
But as I'm sitting there in the bathtub and he's got his hand on my chest and the water is getting up to my neck, I'm
Mhm.
like, he is going to kill me. He's going to kill me. I'm 10 or 11 years old, and I hope this is okay to say, but the spirit said, "Grab his balls and pinch them."
Wow.
And I'm like, I didn't know what that meant at a 10-year-old. Do what? you know, grab his balls and pinch them? Where's his balls? No, I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know, right? So
Yeah.
I'm sitting there and the water is literally at my chin. And he's got the one hand on my chest, the other hand on my feet. And I reached out and I had nails at the time. I reached out and I just grabbed hold of his balls and I squeezed him as hard as I could. And he kept saying, "Let go, Stephanie, let go." And I said, "You let go first." And he goes, "I'm not letting go." So I said, "I'm not letting go either," as I feel the water getting up to my mouth. And I'm like, "You let go." And so he finally let go. And so I let go. And he says, "Don't you dare tell anybody that this happened." And he walked out the bathroom door and shut it. So I turned off the water, and I'm just going, "What just happened? What just happened?" And as a child, I'm like, he will kill me if I tell anybody. He tried to kill me right now. So I never spoke about that to anyone until the second time that you disappeared. The second time that you were kidnapped, and more of the story was coming out, and things were happening, and we were getting more information. And I think were you 14?
Yeah, I was 14, and I hadn't told anybody. They didn't know anything about the abuse. And even after being examined at the doctor after the first kidnapping, they basically came back and said, well, the hymen is intact, and we don't think that there's been any kind of, sexual impropriety or abuse, or, and I don't know. It was so interesting because back then, in those days, you could, and you can still actually in many states get a license to be married at like age 14, and so it's interesting, just even the way that a doctor, a professional, would talk to my parents and say, yeah, we don't think there's been any impropriety. It's like, what do you mean? She's a child, but I look back on that and I think, well, because they didn't have the language, they didn't have the words, they weren't talking about, rape of a child. They didn't use words like that. They didn't use even words like molestation was not common at all in your language. Like, what does that mean? My parents did say, well, we'd heard of a child molester, but of course that's not who our friends are. It just was not in the context of our lives. It just didn't have any context, and I think that's really hard for people to understand, which this is really important in your story as well. You don't have any context. You're like, no, something like this has never happened before. What are my words to even begin to tell my parents? And even though there was still no information about anything, because I told nothing about it, there might have been others who were maybe having thoughts like, well, something could have happened, and now she's gone again. What's going on? So there was, I'm sure, talk, maybe in the, the corners and the crevices and the alleyways, around our town. But there was no solid information that said, other than really Pete Welsh, our FBI agent, who said, I just know this is an evil man. I just know he's evil. And my dad saw through him, early. It took my mom a little longer. But by the time the second kidnapping happened, both of my parents had seen through his multitude of, just being able to manipulate people, period. Not thinking he was a child abuser or a sexual predator, but that he was not who he seemed to be for those 3 years before, when we were just becoming such close friends. Right. So as you were trying to talk to your parents, what was happening in those conversations? Did you talk to your mom first? How did that go after that experience?
There wasn't a lot of communication still there, because I think you had gotten back. There was just that confusion, and everything just went on like, okay, she's back, we're fine, we're moving on. So there wasn't still a lot of communication.
And about the experience that had happened to you, though, I
never brought it up. Never brought it up at that point in time.
Okay.
And because I was still trying to figure it out. I'm like, why would he do that to me? And then I just made sure that I was never with him by myself, ever. And of course I wasn't then either. I mean, all my siblings were sitting around watching TV, and he picks me up and puts me over his shoulder and hauls me off, so it was like, what? So I was kind of paying more attention to what he was doing, even as a 10 or 11-year-old. But he told me not to tell anybody. I wasn't going to tell anybody, I mean, he would kill me. He already tried.
Don't tell. Parents think that if they have really good communication with their kids are going to tell them. I'm like, no, because your children are not young adults. They're not little
Right.
adults. They're not mini-sized adults. They're actually children, meaning their brain development, their ability to put associative things together is limited. They will
Right.
not they will not do something that they think either will harm somebody else in their family. They're not going to tell because of that, or that they themselves will get harmed. No matter how great you think your communication is, they don't have the skill set in their brain to put
Right.
those sorts of components together and go, oh, that's what's actually happening. They can't do it. It's why
No.
we have to protect children. The adults are the ones responsible to protect children, because they won't get it.
Right.
They're not going to tell, even though you have this utopic, wonderful, growing up years, safe, loving parents, loving siblings, five other, you know, it just, yeah, it just
Doesn't compute in
it
that.
doesn't compute.
Yeah, and
Exactly.
I want to make sure that people understand it was not my family that lived on the same street with me. They were our protectors. They were
Hmm.
all our protectors. They would have done anything for any one of us to protect us.
Yeah.
And they always did, and so that's why we always felt safe. We always felt safe, but
Yeah.
when mom and dad would leave, this other uncle would come over, and it was not a good thing,
Yeah, but no matter what, you weren't going to tell. And probably
No.
anybody else in those same age ranges, which is such
Right.
a sensitive period of time where you're always embarrassed about everything anyway,
Yeah.
so you all automatically you assume the shame position, like,
Right.
oh, this is embarrassing, and I'm not going to tell, and I'm scared. It's all of those things combined.
Well, and it wasn't until a few years later that in fact you had gotten home, things were all settled down, and you remember the fire.
Yes.
It
Yeah,
was
right
funny
after.
because we were talking about the fire the other day, and
When my
because
father's store was burned to the
when your
ground,
father's
and the other
store,
businesses
so
in
the
that
other business
block.
right next to it was the dry cleaners.
Hmm.
And it's so funny how these are all tied together, but my other uncle had owned a store, and this was right after the flood, the Teton Dam flood, and
Oh,
he had
right.
bought all of the apparel from all those stores up there. So for days and days and days, us kids put the clothes out on Parrish Lane, and we'd washed them all down and everything. And so all that inventory was at that dry cleaners when it burned to the ground.
Oh, my word.
So my dads, my uncles, all of us kids, we were all there when that fire was going on, because all those clothes that we had worked so hard on were at that
Oh,
dry cleaners that burned down when he burned down your dad's shop.
oh, my word.
So it was just kind of one of those other connectors.
And he was getting the clothes because he was trying to clean them for the people,
Right.
or
Well,
he
we
had just
bought them. We bought
acquired
out
them.
the
I see.
retail stores because we had Parrish Company store. So he
Okay.
bought all this stuff that had been, washed down with the flood, and it was
Right.
gross. And
Because
so
that
we had to wash
Teton
it all down,
Dam,
and then it was getting dry cleaned so we
right.
could sell it
Okay.
at the store.
Yeah. That
So,
was
or
a big
donate it or
flood. That
whatever.
was a big disaster when
Yeah.
that dam
It was
broke.
just crazy because it was just one more of those connections for us, for our families
Yeah.
together again. And like, what? What's going
Yeah,
on
that
here?
your family suffered by association with this madman
Right.
when he committed that crime, and
Right.
there were many businesses in that building
Yeah.
that were destroyed and burned and lost, and the
Yeah.
whole block is gone. Now what
Right.
is there? There's a bank, isn't there,
I think
sitting there
so.
in a parking lot?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was driving there the other day. I was like, I think this is where it was. It was been so
yeah,
long ago.
yeah. That's interesting. So what happens after, you're a little bit older now? I'm back home. You're starting to talk about, maybe what's either happened to me, or you're just starting to communicate. You said at one point your dad kind of sat you all down. Tell me
He
about
did.
that.
And I remember we had moved off of Parrish Lane, and we were up by Highland, which is so sad that our schools had that big fire in it this last weekend. But so
Oh,
kudos to all the firefighters that fight that fire at Highland High School. Thank you so much.
oh. Yeah, that was
It
the
was
other
just,
major high school that got
yeah,
built in Pocatello. I went to
yeah,
Pocatello High School, and then there was Highland High School that was built a
yeah,
few years later.
yeah.
And yeah, that suffered a big fire also,
Just
just
this last weekend,
weekend.
again, these emotions are just like, whoa, all these things coming up, and
Yeah.
memories. But I remember I was probably 14, 15, somewhere right there. Cause we had just moved up to Highland, and we were sitting, my dad called us all in, and he says, I need to ask you guys a really difficult question. So all 6 of us kids were there, and mom and dad. And he said, I need to know if any of you have been sexually abused by this uncle. And we're all like, and my dad was an attorney, a very, very brilliant attorney.
Yeah, it's
And
very renowned in our
I'll tell you
city.
some more stories about things that had happened growing up that I didn't put 2 and 2 together for a while.
Okay.
But I sat there and I'm like, well, I haven't been sexually abused by him, but I was physically abused by him. And so I told my story. That's the first time I had said it to anyone. And then my sisters broke down and said that, yes, he had abused them sexually.
Mm.
And we're like, what's bringing this up, Dad? What's going on? And he had, my other cousin who lived in Salt Lake had just filed rape charges against him. And
Wow.
he had been raping and molesting her since she was a very small child. And Dad's like, we've got to make sure that you kids were okay. So that turned our world upside down.
Yeah.
It turned my world upside down. I'm sitting here listening to my sisters telling their stories, and I'm like, how did I get away with only being almost murdered instead of raped and all this stuff? So for a while, it took me a number of years to just try to understand. And my sisters have been amazing, but they've also had a little bit of that. How come you didn't get this?
Mm-hmm.
We all did. Why didn't you?
Yeah.
And so there's been a lot of that too, but there's also been a lot of, for me too, why didn't I? Was it
Yeah.
because I stood up to him? Because what would he have done to me had I not stood up to him and fought him like that? Not saying that they didn't, they probably did, but the stories were never told until we got into high school. And then I started putting all these different things together. And there was a number of times, trying to be really careful what I say, because I don't want to say anything, but there's a number of times that I witnessed this particular uncle, or heard as he was doing it, abusing his children and my cousins.
Oh,
And as a
dear.
small child, I didn't know what I was hearing, and I didn't realize what I was seeing. And I walked in on him in the act with a couple of cousins, and I was terrified. And he said, "I'll kill you if you tell." And I walk upstairs, and my cousins are crying. I go get my dad, and I'm like, "Dad, this is what he's doing, and I don't know what it is." And I was probably 7 or 8 at the time. And my dad tried so hard to file charges against him, but there was no laws. There was no laws on the books.
That's right.
He's like, we have got to get them separated. And my aunt, because she was the mother of the kids that this was happening to, wouldn't file charges. And it was just such a new beginning for all of us. Nobody understood what was going on. And then come to find out, some of my other cousins that lived on the same street were being abused by a totally separate uncle on that street. So it was happening all the time, but nobody was talking about it.
Right.
And it shouldn't have been happening. We thought we were living in this little utopia, like you said, until we get into our high school years, and a few years after that, we're finding out what was going on, and it was a whole new world. And I remember my sister, when she got married, she tried to file charges against my uncle. And it was so hard, because she was going through also all sorts of mental counseling and all sorts of help to try to figure out how she just got married, and it was affecting her marriage, and just a lot of things. And the judge came back and said her statutes of limitations had run out, and she couldn't file charges against him. Now that's been changed. I believe there's no statutes of limitations on time now, at least in the state of Idaho.
Yeah.
So that's a really, really good thing. But for us as a family, it brought us really close together in some ways. And in other ways, it pulled us way apart, going, how did I not see this? How, and I tell my dad every time I'd hear something or I see something, and he would try. I didn't
Mhm.
realize what he was going through to try to get this stopped, and
Mm.
he was doing everything in his power that he could to get it stopped.
Didn't your father even write some sort of, I don't know if it was legislation, but he had a cohort or something. I vaguely remember that he was kind of putting together like, we need laws like this.
Yes,
We need
that
to
was
we need to have these kinds of laws so that there is recourse.
right.
So that when somebody breaks this law, there is a punishment.
Yes,
And
that was
that's a
exactly
lot of the
him.
problem. Yeah.
Yeah. He
And
did
I
change a
don't think
lot
people
of
even,
things. A lot of
yeah, and I
things.
don't think people think about that very often. But if
Right.
there isn't a law in place, then when somebody, does something terrible, if there's no law against it, you have no recourse. And so
Right.
I think that that was a lot of what our generation became. As we grew up and we got older, we realized, okay, we got to end this statute of limitations.
Right.
If you're 10 years old or 6 years old, let's say, and you have 10 years to report it, there's no way you're reporting it by the time you're 16 or talking about it. Most of
No.
us, it takes, the National Sexual Alliance Foundation said it takes an average of 21 years for a woman to report her rape, for a
Yeah.
girl, a female, and that
Right.
most men and boys don't ever report it. And if they
Right.
do, it's well into their 50s and 60s and 70s. It
Yeah.
doesn't happen like within, those few years. And again, it's because children, tweens, and teens are not little adults.
Right.
They are children, tweens, teens, and then they become young adults. And even then, their brain and their ability to put things together on a conscious level that makes you put pieces together of a complex puzzle like abuse is,
Right.
doesn't really happen until 25 to 29 years old, where you maybe would have the all of the brain power and the understanding of social norms. I mean, half the time kids are being abused, they don't even know it's wrong,
Right.
right?
That's so true. And just like there's these people that you trust, know, love, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't turn, they make you think that it's right and it's okay and it's a beautiful thing, and it's like, but you don't want
Yeah.
kids to be at fear either. You don't want them to be in
Right.
fear, and you don't want them to accuse
Never
or
trust.
panic. We
Yeah.
had, when I had all my little kids at home, we had an exchange student there from
Mm-hmm.
Germany, no,
Mm-hmm.
Denmark, and she was having some issues. She was having some problems, and the spirit told me, absolutely do not let her be alone with your husband ever. Not that he would
Mm.
ever do anything, but it only takes one accusation.
Right.
Because he was dropping her off at school on his way to work, and I was getting all the other kids ready and stuff like that. And he came home. I said, that cannot happen anymore. Not that anything's happening. It is not. But all she needs to do is say it is. So
Yeah.
it's got to be both ways too. We have to be very protective of those of us that are not. You know, some of my children were abused, and no matter what I tried to do, tried to protect them, it still happened.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I felt really responsible for a long time, but I'm like, you know what? I went and got them out of the situation that they were in, and
Mm.
and things happened, and it still happened. And it's just so prevalent and so, I kicked myself and I beat myself up for a long, long time, going, why wasn't I there? Well, I was there. I did go get those children from that house. I did do that. What happened later, as I thought I was protecting them
Mm-hmm.
because of choices that they made and choices that happened, it still happened.
Yeah.
So you have to be, I guess, as a mother, we have to be so careful, but we can't take it upon our shoulders either, because evil's all around us. And we have to be
Yeah.
so careful to just try to teach our children, try to teach them the best we can.
Right. And absolutely. And I think that that's really an important point that you're making, that, the shame aspect of abuse, whether it's the parent who feels the shame that they didn't protect their child, that they didn't know, or the person who's been abused, that there's just this shadow of shame that just follows you around all the time and you don't even deserve it. It happened to you, and I often say, there's one perpetrator who we blame, and it's the person who perpetrated the abuse. That's the person who is to blame.
Right.
Other people might have, if they had known better, or if they had not made one choice or the other, it might have turned out differently, but you still cannot blame someone for what they don't know. They don't know.
Right.
You just can't. You don't know. You don't know.
Right.
And so I feel like a lot of our efforts need to be in making sure, like you were saying earlier, that we never, how can I say this? It's rare that somebody will falsely accuse someone if they're a child. Children have a hard time lying about that.
Hmm.
As you get older, and as that, that independence starts to happen, again, if you study kind of the way that the child development and teen development happens, into young adulthood, then there is a place where it can happen, like what you were talking about, where somebody might falsely accuse someone for attention, or for, some small, uh, not that I'm trying to make, sexual innuendo or things like that be, you know, um, okay, but it also isn't the same thing as being raped as a child.
Right.
And so if you can somehow call out what those different layers and levels are, so that your children, your tween, your teen actually knows this is exactly what consent means. This is exactly what harassment is. This is
Hmm.
exactly what, sexual harassment is. This is what assault is. This
Hmm.
is what molestation is. This is what rape is. And then they have words so that people are not falsely accused, which doesn't happen that often. But when that happens, all it does is take our focus off of what is really the problem. And the real
Exactly.
problem is that the adult, the uncle, is abusing children who don't talk or tell.
Yeah.
That's
That's
the
that's so true.
problem that we're trying to unpack and figure out how to lessen the the number of times, or to intervene before that happens. That's what my message of telling my own story is about, is that first and foremost, you have to open your eyes and realize it's not a scary stranger. It is
Right.
someone that you know, in your family, in your neighborhood, in your church community, in your community center, in your sports team. And you have to be willing to see it. And like your dad, who probably didn't see it, maybe didn't notice some of the things with his
Right.
own daughters that were, maybe they're not red flags. They're
Mm.
subtle things. Were they, a little more sullen? Were they separating themselves from the family? Were they, you know, all of a sudden, overly kind of protective of, nobody can see, you know, me? Or you don't know what the subtle signs might have been, but because we didn't have the education that is available to us today, you're going to miss it because it's not
Right.
a red flag. It's something very subtle, right? Do you
Right.
remember anything
Oh,
with your sisters that you would ever pinpoint? And not that you want to tell their story. Maybe we'll have them on the show sometime and
yeah.
they can tell their own story. But
Yeah, 'cause and we're still
just
learning
anything that
their
affected
story.
you. Yeah,
We're still learning their
right.
story, and I remember I had a sister that would get so angry. She was so angry, and if there was ever a fight, it was her and one of us.
Mm,
And when we found out that she had was one of the ones that had been abused, it was like, was that tied into that somehow? Was that her way of dealing with what was happening without telling,
hmm. Yeah.
lashing out?
Gaining
You just
control.
don't ever know, and my other sister, like I said, when she got married, it was really affecting her marriage a lot because what she had been through was affecting everything in her life, and it's like,
Absolutely.
what is your problem? And but it's interesting because we just don't know. There's so many other things I can tell you that happened that I'm just so grateful for my family, because I remember once we were at Ross Park. Again, the whole family, all the uncles, all the cousins, everybody, the whole group of us. This was in the 70s. And, when streakers were really were really a big
Popular.
thing, right? And I
Yeah.
remember us all down there on the lower part across from the pool down there playing volleyball, and these streakers come through, and our dads are trying to protect us from seeing them, and they actually run into the swing sets, and they got caught up in the swings, and their naked bodies are hanging in the swings, and we're all laughing, and our parents were just, I can't believe you're seeing
Mortified.
this. It was so funny. But my dad had told us all, you guys just stay where we can see you. Make sure that nobody wanders off, nobody leaves, make sure that everybody's got a buddy. We all had a buddy because everybody had a cousin, or two or three. And so they did what they were supposed to do. They did do we had amazing parents. And, when you have 5 parents living on the same street as you, because they were all our parents,
Right.
they were all allowed to discipline. They were all allowed to do, whatever. They were all allowed to, get us ice cream if we wanted. It was just a magical thing. And I remember being there, and after all the streakers got out of the swing sets, and everybody was just kind of this commotion going on. And I loved, for some reason, I loved to hike up the rocks there,
Yeah.
and I'd
Oh,
love
yeah.
to
The
go
lava
sit up where
rocks, the
nobody
big
could see
lava
me.
rocks.
Big lava rocks. And you get up to the top level, and that's where the Fort Hall Museum is at and everything. And there was a really cool place about halfway up the rocks. And I remember just wanting to just get away from the chaos of everybody running into these guys and the stuff going on. So, there's 40 of us there. So I go walking up this pathway, and all I could hear is my dad saying, "Stay where we can see you. Stay where we can see you." Well, I could see them, but they couldn't
Yeah.
see me. I was up in the trees on this pathway, and I went and sat down at the end of the cliff, hanging my legs over, singing at the top of my lungs. My dad's like, "I could hear you, but I couldn't see you." I'm sitting up there singing like I always do at the top of my lungs. I think we were just watching Oklahoma or something. And it's like, I could see you, and I heard him calling me, and I didn't want to call him back. So I was just up there singing, by myself, because that's what I
Yeah.
like to do. And these 2 men came walking up that pathway, and they're like, "Hey," and they just started being really, really inappropriate. And there was no place to go. My feet were dangling over the cliff, and there was
Yeah.
cliff on one side and mountain on the other side. And I'm like, "Oh my goodness, what am I going to do here? What am I going to do? These guys could have their way with me, and nobody would know it. They couldn't even see me. Nobody could see me. I could see where they were."
Right.
And I could hear everybody down there laughing. And, as when you talk about praying and asking Heavenly Father to help you, I was probably 12. And I stood up, and I'm like, okay, what do I do? Because I don't have anywhere to go. And they were getting closer and closer and closer. And if I step backwards, I'm falling off the cliff. And it kept going through my mind, "Stay where we can see you. Stay where we can see you." And I'm like, "Oh, Heavenly Father, they can't see me. They'll never know." I said, "Help me." And I hear in my head, "Run." And I'm like, "Run to them?" I mean, they're taking the whole pathway, and it's cliff here and it's mountain here. So I just started running. Closed my eyes, and I started running. And the next thing I know, I'm between them, and I've gone through the other side, and they're back there going, "What are you doing?" And I'm taking off down the cliff. And it was totally the Spirit that pushed me through them. And I ran down, and my dad's like, "What are you doing?" I can't tell you. He's like, "What are you doing?" So he and my uncles went up to try to find these guys, and they couldn't find them. Of course, they couldn't find them, but I'm sure they went
Right.
up the other way. But it was just one of those things. If you listen to your parents, they're pretty smart. And if you take
Right.
advice from your parents, they're pretty smart. And that was one of those days I should have listened to my dad.
Yeah.
Stay where we can see you,
And
and
I
I
think
just,
that's just a good advice for any
anybody.
woman,
Yeah.
it really, because abuse happens almost as frequently to little boys and young men as it does to girls.
Yeah.
There's just something about taking advantage of children and tweens, that, it's easy to do,
Yeah.
because of where they're at with being in close, proximity to the perpetrator, and then they don't tell, like you said. And so there is something about being in a group. I am a big proponent of not letting, of having one adult and one child interactions. Like, that shouldn't happen in
Right.
churches, in schools, I'm pretty much anywhere,
Yeah.
because it's just there's just too much, that could happen and does happen. And oftentimes it is in those one-on-one adult child interactions, or adult tween, or adult teen, interactions that, can always be framed as if that child is special, important, smart, the brightest one in the class, or they know their scriptures better than somebody else, or what. You can frame it to make that person, that child, that teen or tween feel so special that you're special. And that just starts a whole different kind of communication that is unspoken, where that adult can take advantage of all of the ways that a young person will lean into that,
Yeah.
because we want to feel special, we want to be accepted. It's a big thing to have, that's why, middle school and junior high school is so hard, because you feel so awkward and you want to fit in so badly.
Right.
And so you'll do things and not tell about things, through those middle school, high school years, that you should tell or talk about, that you've been taught to tell or talk about. You've
Right.
been taught to make sure we can see you,
Right.
and yet you don't do it because of the pressure of your own, growing independence. And then if you do make a mistake, then you don't want to say, to your parents or whatever, what's actually gone on or happened. And so it's really just an ongoing battle to, continually model and teach our children, our teens, our tweens, and our young adults, about appropriate behavior and about what isn't okay, and to let them know that they're not in trouble, that
Right.
the other person that did that, because a lot of times it's just an older, sibling, or an older cousin, or it's not always an adult. And if it is an older child or sibling, or cousin or something like that, usually that child has had some kind of sexualization experience.
Right.
So it's really important that we're really fair, and that we don't shut any of it down by making our children feel ashamed of their
Right.
bodies, of their sexuality as they grow. And I just feel like that's one of the things that was missing a lot
Yes.
in
Oh,
my
absolutely.
childhood. I had a wonderful childhood up until those years, but there was a lot of shame associated with, you know, just the most simple of sexual things that
Yeah.
children, young teens and teenagers begin to feel. And I think that emphasizing the right things to look out for, and taking out the pressure of, oh, this is a terrible thing, when it's not a terrible thing. The terrible thing is abuse.
Hmm.
That's the
Yeah.
terrible thing. It's not that your body has all of these wonderful, beautiful sensations and wants to feel, loved. That's
Yeah.
not a terrible thing.
That's right.
So
And
it's
we
interesting.
need to embrace that. That's what God made our
Yeah.
bodies to do in the right
Yeah.
setting. And
Yeah.
on that note, Jan, I wanted to tell your listeners, because I made a huge mistake, and it's, multiple mistakes, obviously, but because we all do. But when one of my daughters was abused,
Mhm.
I had gotten her out of the situation. The spirit was very strong that said, you go get her and bring her home. And I did. And it wasn't until a few years later, she had just turned really dark. And
Mm.
she was really mad at me for going and getting her, but I let her best friend come over, and I went and got him pizza. And I said, you guys, you just need to be here. I went and made sure that they went to bed at midnight, and I locked all the doors and did all those things. And it wasn't until a few years later that she had told me that her friend's brother and his friend had come to the house, and they let them in. And they were abused in my house after I had gone and done all this. And my big mistake that I made, and I don't want other parents to make this, was I said, but you're the one that let them in. I went and protected you. I did everything I was supposed to, but you went and unlocked the doors and let them in. And I didn't know they were there. I thought everything was fine, and for a long time that really bothered that I said that to her, because she was already feeling really horribly guilty, and she was already very, very angry with me. And it's like, I did what I was supposed to do, but the Spirit told me very strongly, don't ever say that again. She was a child. She didn't know what she was doing either. When she let the brother in and the friend in,
Right.
they were just supposedly bringing stuff over for them. And it wasn't her choice either, but unfortunately that's what happened. And so
that's, go ahead, finish.
I was just going to say, just don't beat yourself up about it, but be careful how you approach it as a parent if you find out your child's been abused in any situation. It's not their fault, even though it can make you crazy, because you're doing everything possible.
And I think that's a really courageous thing for you to say and to admit and to talk about today on this podcast, because I don't think a lot of parents hear that from other people. Like, don't make this mistake, because the moment that you blame your child for an abuse that happened that was really it's not their fault that they opened the door. Their brain said they're coming to bring us pizza, or whatever the reason was we opened the door. The abuse happened because it wasn't your child that was planning that to happen. And so if you can, just back up and always just come from the place of believing, your child, and not blaming them, like not putting more blame and shame on them, but being able to get them to feel safe that they can open up and tell you, and not to have you shut them down, or to say, well, you shouldn't have been here, or, well, you shouldn't have been wearing that, or, well, I told you not to go out after midnight, or, well, this, and this, and this. That doesn't help them.
It doesn't, but it is very natural. It's very natural to do that, because you're trying to figure out in your own mind, I did try to save them. I did try to do everything. I did the things I was supposed to do, or that I knew I was supposed to do. And I've told my children and everybody that I'm still learning. There's no handbook that goes with this, and now that I've got grandkids and I've been through some very serious abuse in a couple of my marriages. And it's like, wow, I'm just learning how to handle this and how to do this, and to do it differently next time, so that it doesn't hurt me or hurt anybody else, and just on that note, I wanted to just touch on this really quickly, because, I was in a very difficult marriage for a long time with my children, and I wasn't married to my children, but their dad was very, very suicidal. And I've talked about this on a number of podcasts, and I did not realize the damage was happening to my children, because I was trying so hard to do everything right, and after 30 years was when I finally had to walk away, and that did damage to them too. But it was very difficult to see the damage that was being done to my kids. And I was like, I can't do this again. And it's just ripping me to pieces. And I think that people don't realize dealing with something like that is very abusive. It's very abusive. And as much as I did everything I possibly could, and I didn't even realize it was abusive until I got out of it. I'm like, whoa. And I had him tell me at one point in time, I asked him, why will you not even try to get well? Because he wouldn't go to his doctor's appointments. He wouldn't take his medications. He wouldn't do all these things. He would just get mad at me and try suicide again. And he finally one day told me, after the third suicide attempt, he said, Stephanie, if I get well, I have to be responsible for my choices. And I'm like, instead, I have to be responsible for your choices. So, not only sexually abusing, but physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, there's so much more abuse out there. And
Yeah.
we need to, I didn't learn until after my second marriage that was really, really difficult. I needed to get help. I was pulling a lot of stuff that I had happen as a
Mm-hmm.
child into my
Right.
adulthood. So don't be afraid to get help, you guys. Get help. Find
And what
somebody.
would your yeah, what would your advice be? How do you find the right what therapist or
It's funny
help
because
with
I've been to therapists. I've done, you name it, I've done it.
what's
And,
helped you the most,
um,
or is it a combination?
good friends helped
Mm-hmm.
me the most because I didn't feel like I was being judged. Um, when I started giving back with my clinic and just going, you know what? I never thought I'd go into a health and wellness world ever. But once I started doing that, it really saved my life. I was saving other people's lives, but it was saving my life. And it's like, Stephanie, you got to step out of your world and realizing that most of the people coming into my clinic were so sick or dealing with so many horrific things, from cancers to neuropathy to fibromyalgia to traumatic brain injuries, and almost
Mm,
every one of them had had some kind of a trauma in their life, and it was usually
yeah,
an abusive trauma. And if they don't take care of it, it's going to manifest in their physical. And that's what I see coming into my clinic, unless they've been in an accident or something like that. But almost every single person, including myself, has been through some trauma, and their
yeah,
body has to deal with it somewhere, and they're going to turn it into something physical. So, find somebody and talk therapy is good, but talk therapy just makes you relive it, and it wasn't until I married my husband, Ken, that passed away last year. He was an
mhm,
emotional healing coach, and he's like, you just
mm,
identify it. You've got to get rid of it, but you've got to replace it with something, and that needs to be Christ centered. You've got
mm.
to replace it, or it's going to just keep eating at you. So that was probably one of the biggest turns in my life. It's sad that I was 55 years old when that happened. It's like,
But you know what?
yeah,
We figure it out when we figure it out, and it continues to be a lifelong, quest to
absolutely.
find, the right. But we have so much more science-based and clinician-based modalities for actually healing trauma, that
Yeah,
there is science behind it. Like even something that seems to have a religious connotation to it, like forgiveness, there's actually like scientific evidence that when you can, let go of, your own um, rage or anger or hurt or, against that other person, it doesn't make what they did right or okay. They still are going to need to pay the consequences one way or the other.
right.
And they will, I believe.
Hmm.
But it allows you to be able to make space for the positive, for healing, for all of the things that you want to have in your life that include happiness and
Exactly.
joy. And
Yeah,
with you can't have both things at the same time anyway in the same space. And so it becomes something that you actually, these are things you can do that actually do have a scientific change that happens in your body, and a spiritual change that can happen in your brain, and your brain can affect your spirit and vice versa. And there is a way to heal the central nervous system, and trauma can be healed, at least to a
absolutely.
great degree.
Absolutely, it can, and that's why I've taken on my mantra of hope, healing, and miracles. Because and I didn't have that for a long time, and it's just been in the last 5 or 6 years that I'm just like, you know what, Stephanie, you've got a great life. You've been through a lot of crap, and you've dealt
Yeah,
with a lot of crap, and you still are. But
yeah,
there are miracles every single day, and we just need to look for them. And if we're spending our time looking for them instead of finding the things that are going wrong, our whole
absolutely.
bodies change. Our everything changes. Your body, soul, spirit, heart, everything changes. And so the biggest thing for people, don't give up. Don't give up. Just keep putting yourself into positions where good things can happen, and get rid of the Eeyores in your life.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
something my friend and I were just talking about, because my first husband was Eeyore and I was Tigger, always bouncing
Yeah.
off the walls, and he was always, it's another gloomy day. You just
Yeah.
have to surround yourself by people that are like-minded, that are going to help you raise up, because as a
Yeah.
group we can rise. We need good people around us to do that, and good friends, and people
And
that
sometimes
will
it's
really
hard to
listen
cut
to you.
the yes, that really listen. I'm such a proponent of that. Like, if you can be listened to and believed and not judged,
Yeah.
nobody has to fix you. You
I'm
just
so glad you
fix
said
yourself.
that, because my second marriage, he was always like, I just need to fix you. You're so broken. You're so broken. And I'm like, I didn't think I was that broken,
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I left that I'm like, I wasn't broken. I was
Mm,
injured. I was hurting, but I wasn't broken, and it wasn't
right.
until I was stripped down to the very core of my spirit, the very core
Mm-hmm.
of my soul, feeling I was worth absolutely nothing. And for me, growing up the way I grew up and having the experiences I've had in my life, I'm like, who is this person? I didn't know who this person was, that now all of a sudden I'm like, there is nothing left between but me and God, and he's got to help me, because
Yeah.
nothing else is working right now. And I was so grateful to have that knowledge, and wonderful friends and wonderful family that reached out and said, hey, we're here for you, even though you've been through all this crap and you've brought it on yourself. We're here for you. And to
Yeah.
realize, I don't need to judge. I don't want to be judged, and I don't need to judge. I love these people.
Oh,
I
isn't
love
that nice?
everybody, and I'm so grateful that they're in my life. I don't have to judge
Mm-hmm.
them. Thank you. I can just
Yeah.
love you, and you can just love me
Yeah.
without judging.
And isn't that it's just so much easier than
Yeah,
trying to to win it. Just have it. Just be it, you know?
exactly.
And that's really incredible. I know that you had mentioned, like, when you found out that your sisters had gone through the abuse, and that you were like, why didn't that happen to me? That there was some survivor's guilt. Isn't
Absolutely, there
that
was.
interesting?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, there was. And when my children went
Yeah,
through it
I
too, it's
really
like,
think
what did I do wrong? I blame myself for a long time, and
yeah.
when I lashed out at her and started blaming her, it's like,
Mhm.
oh, wait a minute, wait, you're the mom. You're the mom,
Right. Yeah,
and yes, even if you did everything perfect, you can't control everything,
that's right.
and just to not be judgmental, and just find love. Don't be judgmental. you know
Yes, and I'm so happy to hear that you feel like you have kind of come through that, and that you, however many years ago, you kind of turned that corner to be able to go, I am worth it. I am worthwhile, because that's one of the greatest things that is kind of stolen from us in our
yes,
when I talk about stolen innocence, yes, it's innocence of where your natural development should be happening in your physical, your sexual, your emotional bodies, those things that get interrupted. And it is all of that, but a lot of that really boils down to being robbed of the innocence of the world is my oyster. I
yeah,
run everywhere. I sing and skip. I sing at the top of my voice on top of that cliff, as you talked about. And somehow when we go through some of these experiences, that that is the part of our innocence that just goes away, and it's hard to find it and to reclaim it. But I
yes,
do believe you can rewrite your shame story, you can rewrite your sexual abuse story, you can rewrite and recreate things in a way that allows you to see how strong you are and how resilient you are. And so, this, for me, talking to you today has just been such a wonderful experience. And I know that in your work now, you work with people in all of these various ways. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that before we wrap things up?
yeah. It's been really amazing, because when I got married and moved to Canada, my second marriage, which
Mm-hmm.
it was a difficult marriage. It was so different from anything that I had experienced. However, we started this hyperbaric oxygen business up there. And I was
Uh-huh.
introduced to the light therapy, and I was introduced to the natural healing, and I was introduced to all these things. And so even though everything that was happening up there, it was really difficult. And it wasn't just the marriage. I had brought in a business partner, and I'd started a drama academy. Me,
Yeah.
drama,
Oh, yeah.
singing, all that stuff. I started a drama academy. I was teaching voice and teaching dance and teaching drama and running the clinic and trying to keep this crazy marriage together and just all these different things, and being in Canada without my kids.
Yeah.
Their dad wouldn't sign papers for them to cross the border the week before we were leaving, and I didn't have my kids, and there was a lot going on in my world, a lot. And when I finally left and was able to take that business and open it up in St. George, and it was great there too, but I had a business partner that was literally threatening my life, threatening to kill me, threatening to
Oh my gosh.
dismember my body if I tried to cross the border. It was a horrific thing to live through, and she knew my kids' phone numbers and names and where they lived and everything, and she was using that against me. And so there was a lot of stuff going on, a lot. And being in Canada, and I'm like, I just want to go home, but where was
Yeah.
home? And it was just, I knew I needed to go back to Pocatello. That was home. I needed to get home. And through absolute miracles, I was able to get home. And I remember crossing the border with my little baby U-Haul that had just the few things I still owned in my whole entire life. And because of friends and family helping me get out of the country.
Mm.
And I got across the border, and I remember getting out of the U-Haul and going around the back and kneeling down on the ground and just sobbing and kissing the ground and praying and telling Heavenly Father, thank you for getting me out of the country alive. It was, and I'm going, this is my life. This is my life, but I got out safe. And it was just, and I had wonderful, wonderful friends in Canada, and even my former husband, we're still good friends, just a lot of things that my life was just in such turmoil, and I knew I needed to go home or I would
Right.
not make it. And I had walking pneumonia, and the healthcare system up there is so insanely crazy. And I was just at the depths of the core of my soul when I crossed that border.
Wow.
And spend a week with my mom, and then got the opportunity to open my clinic in St. George. And 2 weeks later, I was on my way down there to open a clinic. It was just,
Wow.
there's a whole bunch more to that. But it was that really at that point, I started looking for the miracles, going, number one miracle, I'm out of the Canada alive. That's a good
Yeah.
thing. That's a bonus.
Right, and back to your childhood home. I had to do that at one point
Yeah.
too with my little boy. I had to go home to
Yeah.
Pocatello,
And
to
I
my
just needed to
home.
be in Pocatello. I needed to be
Yeah,
around my family. My
real
mom had
period
bought
of
my
time.
sister's house. I was in my sister's house, and I was there for such a short time, but I'm like, I just needed to breathe. I didn't feel like I could breathe. And I was like,
Yeah.
I just need to sit here and cry. And I need to know it's a safe place to do that. And nobody's going to care that I'm sitting here crying and I can't get out of bed, and it was I'd been through so much for so long, 30 years in the first one, now 3 years in the second one. And my kids were just their worlds were in upheaval, and my world was in upheaval. And I just needed to refocus. Okay, Stephanie, refocus. Your goal is to help others get well. And when I finally got that into my head, because I was doing that in Canada quite a bit, but I had so much other things going on. And that's when everything really started changing. I'm like, okay, you're not in this for you. You're in this because you have been given this opportunity to help people that may not ever get this help somewhere else. And I tell people all the time, my favorite clients that come in are the ones that come in and say, there's nothing else the doctors can do for me. Or what can you do to help me? Because nobody else can help me. I was like, well, let's put the tools in your body. that will help your body heal itself, which is oxygen and light. Let's try it. And we get to
Wow.
see miracles every day. And so I'm so blessed to do what I do. And I'm so blessed to be where I'm at. There's a whole other story behind that, why I'm back in Idaho. And I don't even know, we opened our doors here in July of last year. And in the process, I lost my husband. He passed away.
Yeah.
Which was a crazy thing. That's what my book is about. And then through his promise of helping me find somebody else so that I don't have to go through this crazy alone, 2 months later, I found my new husband. And it's just been a miracle. And to be here in Southern Idaho in this little itsy bitsy tiny community, and to have probably 8 or 10 clients come in and say, I prayed you here. I prayed for you to come here. And that's why I'm here.
Wow.
And it's like,
And so it's the hyperbaric chamber that you still are, and this is what you basically went to Canada to learn about, and with this partner who was then not everything she was cracked up
She
to
wasn't
be,
a partner in the hyperbaric
right.
business. She was a partner in the Drama Academy business.
Oh, okay.
My husband up there and I were partners in the hyperbaric business. And we had the most amazing training. We went to British Columbia and did training on light therapy, and I became a nationally certified light therapist and an internationally certified hyperbaric therapist. I mean, there was really good things that came out of the fire,
which is always interesting, right? The fire is going, and yet what is going to rise from the dust?
Exactly.
And what kind of refinement are you receiving? They talk about that, walking through fire and being refined by the fire. And those are the difficult parts of life that actually make us, into that really strong, piece of steel that we are. And
I said that in my book a couple times, that I really am so grateful. I don't think of them as they were actually really amazing learning opportunities. Yeah. Everything that I've been through has been amazing learning opportunities. Even having the magical childhood that I had, and I wanted that for my kids so bad, and it didn't happen. But to look back on the things that did happen, that were right and that were really good, I'm so, so grateful for them. I adopted 3 incredibly beautiful children, and I was able to have 3 children after going for almost 10 years without being able to have them. So that was a whole nother world of blessings, that I just wanted to be a mother so bad, and it wasn't happening. And it was like, but then I adopted my daughters, and they were just the most precious things to me. And then I had a child, and it's like, the doctor's like, I said, you told me I couldn't have kids. And he goes, well, you can't. I'm like, kind of 7 months pregnant here. Do you think you can change that? So I just look back at all the different miracles that happened, even though my life was really, really difficult, I thought. And it still is. There's still challenges every day.
Of course.
But you just have to look for the miracles. You have to look for them because they are all around us. We just had a conversation the other night because we still have 2 feet of snow and it's been freezing. Yeah. But we've also been doing a lot of praying and fasting that we would have a slow melt, because if it melted fast, everything would be flooding. And that's exactly what we've got. Yesterday morning, I did a live podcast, and I'm like, it is snowing again. And aren't we grateful that it's snowing again? Because that means
this wonderful
it's
water
going slow. We need the water. So I guess that's just what I would like to tell everybody. We all go through really hard things. Yes. But what we do with those hard things can transform our lives. They can make us better. Absolutely. And if we are putting ourselves in a position to do service for others, that's the biggest thing. Because if we're helping other people, tell me, Jan, do you find people that have had 10 times worse than you all the time? Yes. It's like, whoa, yes. I will take my trials anytime over what you're telling me right now. So I think that's just how life is. What one person can handle, that's what they can handle. Somebody else has got something else, and there's always somebody that's worse off.
Yeah.
So, and our
And
job's to
I
help.
just think developing that kind of an attitude where, talking about miracles or gratitude or being able to forgive somebody quickly, just to be in there in those when life is difficult, when you are surrounded by a person that is, or persons that are not unkind or threatening, or it really makes an impact when we have tools in our tool belt that say, but I can do hard things, and I can forgive, and I can let go, and I can move on, and I can learn something, and I'm going to give to others. And so this is what I'm going to do next.
Yeah.
And you know what? You're a great example of that. And this conversation has been amazing for me. Thank you so much, Stephanie.
My pleasure. I love you, love you, love you.
Thank you. And that's a wrap for today's episode. Thank you for sharing this journey with me today. If you're enjoying the podcast, please take a couple of minutes to rate and review the show. This really helps us spread the word. And if you know someone who would benefit from listening to our show, please do me a favor and share one of our episodes with them. I want every survivor to know that they are not alone and that there is help available. Links to my website, our foundation, the new book, our online community, Thrivivors, and newsletter can be found in the show notes. All of my contact info is there as well. This year, my number one focus is on sharing our stories. This is so important because it's the launching pad to our healing journey, and it inspires the survivor who is still suffering in silence. I don't want anyone to suffer alone anymore. So please reach out. I want to hear from you. Until next time, my friends, this is Mama Jan signing off. Over and out on 2.